There comes a time in every soul's life when silence becomes betrayal, not just to others, but to yourself. A time when the weight of your own unspoken truth crushes you more than any enemy ever could. If you want to be free, stop being afraid of conflict. We are taught from the earliest age to keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Don't cause trouble. Smile, nod, suppress. Be agreeable. And for a while we believe it. We mistake obedience for harmony and submission for strength. But slowly, that false peace begins to rot inside us. The more we avoid confrontation, the more we hand our lives to the will of others. What we call keeping the peace is often just fear wrapped in politeness. And fear, when it rules you, is the most elegant form of prison. You were not born to obey the world's comfort zones. You were born to shape them, and shaping them requires friction, pressure, conflict. Fire, to create anything powerful, steel, truth, love, freedom, you must risk heat and sharp edges. Those who avoid conflict are not free. They are chained to the approval of others, shackled by fear of rejection, beaten down by the need to be liked more than the need to be honest. Conflict is not evil. It is a teacher, a revealer. It is the scalpel that cuts away falsehood. When you avoid it, you avoid the growth that comes from facing resistance. But when you face it, when you stare someone in the eye and speak the truth even if your voice trembles, you reclaim your voice, your values, your identity. And here's the secret no one tells you. Conflict doesn't create enemies, it reveals them. And just as often, it reveals allies you never knew you had. People who were waiting for someone brave enough to go first. The world follows those who refuse to flinch. You want to be free? Then start with this. Stop running. Stop swallowing your thoughts to make others comfortable. Stop fearing the storm and realize that you are the storm. Freedom does not come through compromise alone. It comes through confrontation, through knowing what you believe and standing there, unwavering, when the ground shakes. Most people confuse stillness with peace, but silence in the face of injustice is cowardice. You are not free when you're afraid of difficult conversations. You're not free when you're walking on eggshells, praying not to offend. That's not diplomacy, that's surrender. Freedom starts when you stop negotiating with fear and start negotiating with truth. This does not mean you must fight everything, but it does mean that when the fight chooses you, when your values, your rights, your soul are called into question, you must rise, because conflict is not what destroys us, it is what defines us. It builds character. It draws the line between those who are merely alive and those who are fully alive. You want to grow, then grow teeth. Speak even when it's difficult. Challenge even when it's unpopular. Defend what matters, especially when it would be easier to turn away. The lion is not free because it avoids battles. It is free because it never flinches from them. And as you embrace this, you will discover a strange paradox. The more you face conflict, the less it controls you. The more you assert your truth, the more you attract respect. And with respect comes influence. With influence comes sovereignty. And with sovereignty, finally, comes freedom. Freedom demands courage, not comfort, and courage is often born in the fire of conflict. There is no shortcut around this truth. The desire to live freely cannot coexist with the constant need to remain comfortable. Comfort is a seductive trap. It lulls us into complacency, wraps us in soft routines, and convinces us that risk is unnecessary. But comfort is not the birthplace of growth, and it is never the foundation of freedom. True liberty is not given to those who tiptoe through life avoiding discomfort. It is claimed by those who are willing to bleed for their own voice, to risk tension, and to endure the pushback that comes with choosing honesty over ease. Many people say they want to be free, but what they often mean is that they want to feel safe from rejection, safe from disapproval, safe from conflict. But safety, when pursued above all else, becomes a cage. It binds your decisions to the reactions of others. You start shaping your behavior not according to your values, but according to what causes the least waves. You sacrifice your convictions for acceptance. You let your light dim just so it doesn't make someone else squint. And with each avoided confrontation, each swallowed opinion, each moment of silence when your soul screamed to speak, you lose a piece of your freedom. Not because someone took it, but because you gave it away. The truth is, courage is forged in moments of discomfort. You don't discover your strength when everything is easy. You find it when you're cornered by the need to either speak or shrink, to rise or retreat. Those are the defining moments, and they don't come wrapped in serenity. They come wrapped in the messy, raw, human tension of not knowing how it will end, only knowing that silence would cost you more than conflict ever could. In that fire, you grow. You begin to realize that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of it. And once you taste what it feels like to act from courage, even when you're shaking, you begin to understand that this is the birthplace of freedom. Think about it: every right that has ever been won, every boundary that has ever been drawn, every injustice that has ever been challenged was confronted, not negotiated into silence. Someone somewhere had to risk comfort to ignite change. Someone had to stand in a room of disapproving faces and say, "No, this matters. That's not comfortable. That's not safe. But that is what freedom requires. If you want to lead your own life, to live with integrity, to walk with dignity, you have to accept the cost: courage." And this courage, this fire, it doesn't have to look like loud rebellion. Sometimes it's the quiet but immovable decision to say no. Sometimes it's walking away from what is familiar but dishonest. Sometimes it's choosing your values over your popularity, your truth over your reputation. Every time you choose what is hard but true over what is easy but false, you add to your freedom. Not the kind of freedom handed to you by circumstance, but the kind you earn in your bones, in your breath, in your decision. You will never fully own your life if you're still owned by the desire to be comfortable. Comfort will tell you to let things slide, to keep things easy, to wait just a little longer before confronting what needs to be faced. But you cannot negotiate with what's eating away at your soul. You cannot pretend your way to liberation. At some point, you must stand, and that stand will almost always be against something: an opinion, a system, a person, even a part of yourself. And when that moment comes, you will either retreat into the illusion of peace, or you will embrace the necessary tension of growth. Courage is not glamorous. It's not always loud or heroic. Sometimes it looks like tears, clenched fists, a shaking voice, but still saying what needs to be said. That is the courage that builds freedom. That is the uncomfortable, internal revolution where you take back your power from fear. And every time you do, every time you choose discomfort for the sake of integrity, you become more yourself, more whole, more free. So when you feel the heat of conflict rising, do not flee it. Do not shut down the impulse to stand firm. Recognize it for what it is: your opportunity to become sovereign, not because conflict feels good, but because it forces you to choose. And in that choice, you define who you are. You reclaim the pen. You become the author of your own story, written not in fear, but in fire. Avoiding conflict enslaves you to fear, while facing it teaches you control, strength, and independence. It's one of life's hardest truths, but also one of its most liberating. The very thing we run from, the discomfort, the confrontation, the potential for things to go wrong, is often the gateway to our personal power. We convince ourselves that by staying quiet, by not making it worse, we're being wise, we're keeping the peace, but all too often, what we're really doing is giving fear permission to lead us. And once fear is in the driver's seat, freedom has no place to sit. The danger of avoiding conflict is not just the moment you let slide, it's the accumulation. Every time you avoid standing up for yourself, you tell your mind that your truth isn't worth defending. You teach yourself that it's safer to be small. That lesson compounds until fear becomes automatic. You begin to flinch before anyone even raises their voice. You start apologizing before you've even said anything wrong. You lose your voice before you've even tried to use it. And before long, you're no longer acting freely. You're reacting habitually, bound by the invisible leash of fear. But when you face conflict, when you lean into the hard conversations instead of shrinking away, something remarkable happens. You start to realize that the world doesn't end when you speak your truth, that people don't always abandon you when you hold a boundary, that you are stronger than the fear made you believe. Each time you face a challenge head on, you build a sense of inner control, not control over others, but over yourself. You start to choose your responses rather than being ruled by anxiety or people pleasing. You shift from being reactive to being intentional, and in that shift, you begin to taste real independence. Control doesn't come from manipulating the world into behaving. It comes from trusting your ability to handle what happens when it doesn't. That trust is earned, and it's earned in conflict. When things don't go your way, but you don't collapse. When someone challenges your beliefs, and you don't fall apart. When tension rises, and instead of running, you plant your feet and stay present. That is where strength is built, not the kind of strength that roars and dominates, but the kind that stands steady in the storm and doesn't flinch. Avoiding conflict can feel like safety, but it's a safety that costs you your soul. You become someone who nods when you should object, who agrees when you disagree, who smiles when you're silently breaking. That safety is a cage. It's the illusion of peace, but underneath it is quiet misery, the kind of misery that festers. And over time, that buried frustration doesn't disappear. It leaks out in resentment, in self-loathing, in passive aggression, and in deep emotional exhaustion. You can only silence yourself for so long before something inside begins to decay. On the other hand, when you start facing conflict, you rewire yourself. The fear doesn't necessarily vanish, but you stop letting it dictate your choices. You learn that a raised voice doesn't mean your worth is under attack. You learn that someone disagreeing with you doesn't mean you're wrong or broken. You begin to feel the ground under your feet again. That's what independence feels like, not the absence of fear, but the presence of courage in spite of it. Facing conflict also teaches you clarity. When you avoid it, your mind spins with assumptions. What if they're mad? What if I hurt them? What if I ruin everything? But when you actually engage, you get real answers. You hear real voices. You gain real information. And most importantly, you discover your own voice. How it sounds when it's honest. How it trembles at first and then steadies. That self-knowledge becomes your compass. It tells you where your lines are, what you believe, what you stand for, and no one can take that from you. We grow up believing that peace is the goal, but without strength, peace is just surrender with a prettier name. Real peace comes after the storm, after the hard conversation, after the brave stand. It's the peace that comes when you know you didn't run, when you didn't betray yourself. That peace has depth. It has dignity. It doesn't come from hiding. It comes from facing the fire and surviving it. Conflict is not the enemy. Fear that silences you is. Every avoided conflict is a small retreat from who you really are, and every conflict faced is a step toward reclaiming yourself. The choice is always there. In every tense moment, every difficult interaction, you are either giving fear more power, or you are taking your power back. You are either shrinking or strengthening. You are either falling into dependence or stepping into your own sovereignty. True peace is not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of it. Too often, we imagine peace as a calm, undisturbed state where nothing goes wrong, where everyone agrees and nothing challenges us. That fantasy leads us to run from conflict at all costs, as if avoiding tension is the same as living in harmony. But real peace is not fragile. It is not delicate or dependent on circumstances being ideal. It is resilient. It is forged through struggle, not around it. Peace, in its truest form, is not what happens when everything is quiet. It's what remains steady when everything else isn't. We confuse avoidance with resolution. We think a silent room means a peaceful one, when in reality it could be filled with unspoken resentment, suppressed opinions, and internal wars no one is acknowledging. That silence is not peace, it's just the sound of fear holding everyone hostage. Mastery of conflict, on the other hand, is about facing what's real. It's about knowing how to navigate the hard conversations, how to stand in discomfort without being consumed by it. That kind of peace is powerful because it's earned. It doesn't depend on pretending things are fine. It's born from making them right, even when it's hard. There is a deep strength in people who can walk into conflict with calm. These are not people who enjoy arguing or seek control. They are people who no longer fear confrontation because they have built the skill, the self-knowledge, and the emotional resilience to hold their ground without attacking, to listen without absorbing venom, and to respond without losing themselves. That is mastery, and it is the only kind of peace that can withstand real life, because life, by its very nature, is full of conflict. People will disagree, values will clash, misunderstandings will happen. To expect otherwise is to set yourself up for permanent disappointment. We are not meant to eliminate conflict. We are meant to mature through it. Conflict is not just a disruption. It's a mirror. It shows you who you are, what you're afraid of, what matters to you, and where you still need to grow. If you are willing to look into that mirror with honesty, you gain clarity. If you avoid it, you remain stuck in illusion. The more you engage with conflict wisely, the more you understand your own boundaries, your own voice, your own values. You begin to respond to life instead of reacting to it. And that's the beginning of internal peace, a kind of calm that doesn't vanish the moment someone disagrees with you. Mastery of conflict does not mean controlling others. It means controlling yourself. It means choosing your words when you're angry. It means staying grounded when you're challenged. It means knowing when to fight and when to walk away. It means refusing to let someone else's chaos pull you out of your center. That takes practice. It takes failure. It takes having the hard conversations, sometimes badly, and learning from them. It takes falling into old patterns, catching yourself, and choosing differently. Over time, this practice builds emotional muscles, and those muscles are what give you the ability to walk through conflict without losing your peace. This kind of peace is not just emotional, it's strategic. People who master conflict have more influence. They're not afraid to speak up, and they're not easily intimidated. They don't have to shout to be heard, because they've cultivated a presence that commands attention. They don't rush to prove themselves because they know who they are. That quiet strength disarms others. It allows space for real dialogue, not just defensive noise. And in that space, things can change. Real understanding can emerge. Progress becomes possible, not through force, but through clarity and grounded presence. There is also peace in knowing that you are not a prisoner to conflict, that you can face it without being destroyed by it, that you can listen without absorbing hate, that you can stand firm without escalating tension. This kind of confidence changes how you live. You stop walking on eggshells. You stop fearing difficult people. You stop bending your truth for temporary relief. And when you stop doing those things, you begin to live from a deeper place, a place where peace is not something you hope others give you, but something you generate within yourself and bring with you even into the fire. When peace becomes a skill rather than a state, your entire life changes. You stop thinking of conflict as a threat and start seeing it as a terrain you know how to walk. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it always ends well, but it does mean that you are no longer dictated by the fear of it. You approach problems instead of dancing around them. You say what needs to be said without cruelty. You listen to what needs to be heard without ego. That is what makes peace sustainable, because it's not dependent on perfect conditions. It's built on inner mastery, and no one can take that from you. So peace is not found in the absence of conflict. It is found in the presence of understanding, in the courage to engage with what is real, and in the power to hold yourself steady when everything around you is uncertain. Master conflict, and you master peace, not the kind that comes from avoidance, but the kind that comes from knowing that, no matter what arises, you will not betray your truth or lose your center. That is the peace that frees you. That is the peace that lasts.